A desperate father searches for hope for his paralyzed daughter after medicine declares her case hopeless. In the park, a mysterious girl touches the child and reveals an energy block no one else could see. That gesture awakens the impossible and begins a healing journey science cannot explain. If this story interested you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and tell us what city you're watching from. And now, on with the story. The Saturday afternoon sun poured its golden light over Lincoln Park in Chicago, but to Robert Miller, that brightness seemed cruel, almost mocking. He slowly pushed the wheelchair where his daughter Isabel remained motionless, her gaze lost in the treetops, showing no interest in the movement around her. Children ran across the lawns, fathers played catch with their sons, couples walked hand in hand. It was a picture of normality that hurt like a sharp blade in Robert's chest. 3 months, 90 days since Isabel had woken up complaining of a pain in her legs and, in a matter of hours, simply stopped walking. 3 months since that entire family's life had been turned upside down. 3 months of tests, MRIs, CT scans, and consultations with the best specialists Chicago had to offer. And nothing. No definitive answer, no solution, no light at the end of the tunnel. Beatrice, his wife, was a respected neurologist at Northwestern Memorial Hospital. She had dedicated 15 years of her career to studying the human nervous system, its complexities, its fragilities. She knew every published article on neuromuscular diseases, every experimental protocol, every therapeutic possibility. But when it came to her own daughter, all that knowledge seemed insufficient, powerless against the mystery that had settled into Isabel's fragile little body. 23 specialists. Beatrice had consulted 23 of the country's best pediatric neurologists. Some spoke of atypical transverse myelitis, others of a rare autoimmune syndrome. There were those who suspected idiopathic neural degeneration. But all of them, absolutely all of them, had reached the same devastating conclusion. There was no effective treatment. The neurological damage was irreversible. Isabel, at 4 years of age, would probably never walk again. Robert stopped near a small pond, where ducks swam peacefully. He knelt beside the chair and held his daughter's cold little hand. Isabel turned her face to him, and in those brown eyes that once shone with mischief and joy, Robert saw only an emptiness that broke his soul. She didn't cry anymore. She no longer asked when she would be able to play again. There was a resignation in that childish gaze that was unnatural, disturbing. The girl who was once a hurricane of energy, who spent the entire day jumping, dancing, singing, playing hide-and-seek through the rooms of the house, now remained quiet, apathetic, as if an essential part of her essence had been erased along with the ability to move her legs. Beatrice tried to maintain hope, diving into studies day and night, making international contacts, investigating experimental treatments in other countries. But Robert saw in his wife's eyes the same despair that consumed him from within. That was why he had insisted on this outing. Beatrice was working at the hospital, immersed in another research marathon, and Robert decided to get Isabel out of the house, to take her for some fresh air. Perhaps seeing other children playing would awaken something in her, a desire, a spark of will. But so far the girl just observed everything with that distant expression, as if separated from the world by an invisible wall. That's when Robert saw her for the first time. A small girl appearing to be between 8 and 10 years old, barefoot, in a simple, worn dress of a faded blue hue. Dark hair tied back in a messy ponytail, tan skin sun-kissed. She was standing under a leafy tree, watching Isabel with an intensity that caught Robert's attention. It wasn't a look of common curiosity. There was something there, a depth, a maturity that didn't match the apparent age of that child. The girl began to walk toward them. Robert felt an immediate protective instinct and positioned himself next to Isabel's chair, prepared to ward off any inconvenient approach. Chicago was a huge city, and the park, despite being a relatively safe place, still required vigilance. But there was something in the way that girl approached, an almost supernatural serenity in her movements that made Robert hesitate. She stopped 2 meters away and fixed her, dark eyes directly on Robert's. They were old eyes, he thought. Strange to think that about a child, but there was no other word to describe it. eyes that seemed to have seen and understood things that went far beyond her young age. "Good afternoon," the girl said, her voice soft but firm. "May I come near your daughter?" Robert blinked, surprised by the formality and politeness of the approach. Usually, homeless children who circulated in the park came asking for money, food, something of that sort. But this girl hadn't asked for anything, just requested permission to approach. "Why?" Robert asked, still cautious. "Because I can help her," the girl replied with a simplicity that sounded almost disconcerting. Robert felt a tightness in his chest. How many times, in the last 3 months, had he and Beatrice heard empty promises? Well-intentioned people suggesting miracle cures, alternative therapies, prayers, folk remedies. All this while 23 specialists, doctors with decades of experience and scientific knowledge, stated that there was nothing to be done. And here was a barefoot child, probably living in a shelter or on the streets, saying she could help. "Look, sweetie," Robert began, trying to be gentle. "My daughter is sick, but she's already being treated by very good doctors. Thanks for your concern, but we don't need any help." The girl didn't move. She continued to look at him with that serene, almost compassionate expression, as if she perfectly understood his disbelief and wasn't offended by it. Then she shifted her gaze to Isabel and took 2 steps forward, slowly, respectfully. "Her name is Isabel," she said, not as a question, but as a gentle statement. Robert felt a shiver run down his spine. How did she know? Had she heard him calling his daughter earlier? That must be it, he thought, trying to find a rational explanation. "And yours?" Robert asked, not quite sure why. "Marina," the girl replied. "Marina Stone." Marina knelt on the grass next to the wheelchair, bringing herself to Isabel's level. The girl in the chair turned her head slightly, and for the first time in weeks, Robert saw a glimmer of something in her eyes. Curiosity? Interest? He couldn't define it, but it was different from that constant apathy. "Hi, Isabel," Marina said sweetly. "You have some trapped energy here, you know?" She pointed gently to the smaller girl's legs. "It's like there's a closed door inside your body, and the strength that should be passing through can't get where it needs to go." Robert was about to protest, to say that this was absurd, that it was just a child's talk, but something made him hold his tongue. Perhaps it was Isabel's expression, which for the first time in a long time seemed truly present, truly paying attention to something. Or perhaps it was Marina herself, with that unshakable calm, that quiet certainty that emanated from her. Marina extended her hand and placed it gently on Isabel's little arm. It wasn't an invasive or abrupt touch. It was light, almost reverent, as if she were feeling something beyond physical contact. She closed her eyes for a moment, took a deep breath, and then murmured something so low that Robert couldn't understand. When Marina opened her eyes again, there were tears in them, not of sadness exactly, but of something that seemed to be deep empathy, as if she could feel the pain and frustration locked inside that paralyzed little body. "My grandma taught me," Marina said, now looking at Robert. "She was a folk healer, lived way out in the Kentucky hills, a little place called Willow Creek. When I was very young, she would take me into the woods, show me the plants, the herbs, teach me to feel people's energy. She said some people are born with the gift of sensing where life is stuck, where it needs to be released. She had that gift, and I have it too." Robert swallowed hard. Part of him wanted to laugh at this absurd situation, a barefoot child in the middle of Lincoln Park talking about energy and healing. But another part, a deep and desperate part, wanted to believe, wanted to cling to any possibility, no matter how improbable. "Is your grandmother here in Chicago?" Robert asked, trying to better understand the situation. Marina shook her head negatively, and a shadow of sadness crossed her face. "She passed away 6 months ago. I came to live here after, in a shelter on the south side, but what she taught me stayed right here." She touched her own chest. "And I know in the depths of my soul, that I can help Isabel." Robert looked at his daughter, then back at Marina. "What exactly would you do?" Marina smiled for the first time, a shy but genuine smile. First, I need to understand better where the blockage is. It's like Isabel's body has forgotten the way, you know? The nerves, the connections, everything is confused. I'll use gentle touches. Some herbs I know. I'll use stimuli with smells, sounds, textures. My grandma called it awakening the pathways. The doctor's medicine looks with machines and drugs. But what I do is different. I wake up what's sleeping. There was no arrogance in her words, just a calm confidence, almost childlike in its simplicity. Robert ran a hand through his hair, feeling lost. Beatrice would never approve of this. She was a woman of science, of evidence, of protocols. How was he going to go home and say that a street kid had offered to heal Isabel with herbs and mystical touches? But then he looked at Isabel again, and he saw that his daughter was smiling. It was a small, almost imperceptible smile, but it was there. For the first time in 3 months, Isabel was smiling. "Okay," Robert heard himself say, almost not believing his own words. "You can try, but just for a little bit, and if Isabel feels any discomfort, we stop immediately." Marina nodded seriously, as if receiving a sacred responsibility. She moved away briefly and went to a nearby flower bed, where she picked some leaves that Robert couldn't identify. She returned, crushed the leaves between her fingers until they released a fresh, slightly sweet aroma, and gently rubbed it on Isabel's wrists. "This helps to awaken the senses," Marina explained softly. "Now I'm going to do some very light touches, and you'll tell me if you feel anything, okay, Isabel?" Isabel nodded slightly, her eyes fixed on Marina with an intensity Robert hadn't seen in months. Marina then began a series of delicate touches, starting at Isabel's shoulders, moving down her arms, always with slow, rhythmic, circular motions. She murmured things quietly, words Robert didn't understand, perhaps prayers, perhaps just a silent conversation with herself. When Marina touched the palm of Isabel's hand, pressing lightly in the center, something happened. Isabel's little finger twitched. It was a tiny, almost imperceptible movement, but it was there. Robert felt his heart race in his chest. "Did you see that?" he exclaimed, crouching beside the chair. "Belle, you moved your finger." Isabel looked at her own hand, surprised, and then at Marina. The young healer smiled, a smile full of tenderness and hope. "See, there's life in there. It just needs a little push to wake up." Robert felt tears burn his eyes. For 3 months, Isabel hadn't moved a single muscle below her waist. And there, with a simple touch from that strange, mystical girl, there was movement. Maybe it was a coincidence. Maybe it was an involuntary spasm. But Robert didn't care. It was the first sign of hope in so long that he was willing to cling to it with all his might. "Marina," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "can you keep coming? Can you try to help my daughter?" Marina looked at him with those deep, old eyes. "I'd like to very much, but I live far away, in the shelter on the south side. It's hard to get here every day." Robert didn't hesitate. "I'll pick you up, every day if necessary, or you can stay at our house during the day while you do the treatment. I'll talk to my wife. I'll explain. I'll make her understand. Please, Marina, please help my daughter." Marina was silent for a long moment, as if pondering something much bigger than the simple logistics of transportation. Then she nodded slowly. "I'll help," she said simply, "because Isabel needs it, and because I feel it's what my grandma would want me to do." Robert took out his phone with trembling hands and noted down the address of the shelter where Marina lived. They agreed that he would pick her up the next day, Sunday, and they would begin the treatment in earnest. Marina stayed a few more minutes, talking quietly with Isabel, telling stories about her grandmother, about the plants she knew, about the little birds that visited the shelter every morning, and Isabel listened, attentive, present, alive. When they finally said goodbye and Robert pushed the chair back toward the parking lot, he felt a mixture of hope and fear. How would he explain this to Beatrice? How would he convince her to allow a street kid, no matter how sweet and special she seemed, to treat their daughter with methods that had no scientific validation? But when he looked at Isabel and saw that she was still holding one of the leaves Marina had picked, smelling it with curiosity and a small, Smile on her lips, Robert knew he would do whatever it took, because if there was a chance, even an infinitesimal one, that this mysterious girl could bring his daughter back, he wasn't going to waste it. The evening at home was tense. Beatrice arrived from the hospital exhausted, with that tired look of someone who had spent the entire day torn between treating patients and obsessively researching her own daughter's condition. Robert waited for her to shower, have dinner, and settle on the living room sofa before telling her about the encounter in the park. As expected, the initial reaction was total disbelief. Beatrice looked at him as if Robert had completely lost his mind. "Are you serious? A street kid, Robert? A child you don't know from anywhere, who appeared out of nowhere, and you just believed she can cure our daughter with herbs and mystical touches?" "She moved her finger, Beatrice," Robert said, his voice firm but gentle. "For the first time in 3 months, our daughter moved a finger. And more than that, she was present. She was smiling. You haven't seen her, Bea. You've been so immersed in research that you haven't noticed how faded, how distant Isabel is. Today she came back. Even if just for a few minutes, she came back." Beatrice closed her eyes, breathing deeply, clearly trying to control her frustration. Robert knew that posture. It was the neurologist trying to assert herself over the desperate mother. "Robert, what you're describing could have been an involuntary muscle spasm. It happens in cases of neural injury. It doesn't mean anything. And as for Isabel's behavior, it's normal for her to react differently to new stimuli. But that doesn't validate an alternative treatment with no scientific basis." "And what if it works?" Robert countered, approaching his wife. "What if this girl really has a gift, whatever that means? 23 specialists said there's nothing to be done. 23, including you, who is one of the best neurologists I know. If traditional medicine has no answers, why can't we try something different?" "Because it could be dangerous," Beatrice replied, but her voice had lost some of its firmness. "Because we know nothing about this girl, about what she's going to do. How can I, as a doctor, allow my daughter to be exposed to something without control, without proper supervision?" "Then supervise," Robert said, taking his wife's hands. "Come with me tomorrow when I pick up Marina. Meet her, talk to her, see what she does. And if at any point you think it's wrong, that it could harm Isabel, we'll stop. But please, Bea, give me this chance. Give our daughter this chance." Beatrice held her husband's hands tightly, and Robert saw tears form in those eyes that tried so hard to be strong, so scientific, so rational. But behind the doctor was a shattered, desperate mother, willing to do anything to save her little girl. "All right," she finally whispered, "but under conditions. I will be present at every session. I will document everything. And at the slightest sign of worsening or discomfort from Isabel, it's over. Is that clear?" "Crystal clear," Robert agreed, hugging his wife in relief. On Sunday morning, Robert and Beatrice went together to the shelter on the south side. It was a simple building, but clean and well kept, run by nuns who dedicated their lives to caring for vulnerable children. Sister Lucy, the director, received them with surprise when they asked to speak with Marina. "Marina is a special girl," the nun said with affection. "Very quiet, very mature for her age. She's been through difficult things, but she has a heart of gold. If you want to help her in some way, we would be very grateful." Robert briefly explained the situation, and Sister Lucy was surprised but not disbelieving. "Marina's grandmother was well known in the area where they lived," she said. "Many people sought out old Joanna for blessings, for advice on teas and natural remedies. When the old woman passed, Marina was brought here by a distant relative, but she never adapted well to the big city. She would spend hours alone in the shelter's small garden tending to the plants, talking to them. When Marina appeared, wearing the same worn blue dress as yesterday but with her hair carefully braided, she smiled shyly at Robert and looked cautiously at Beatrice. "This is my wife Beatrice," Robert introduced. "She's a doctor, a neurologist, and she'll be supervising Isabel's treatment." Marina nodded seriously. "I understand. You want to be sure I won't hurt your daughter. That's right. I would do the same if I were a mother." Beatrice blinked, clearly not expecting such maturity. "How old are you, Marina?" 9, almost 10, the girl replied. "But my grandma used to say that age has nothing to do with wisdom. There are old people who never learned anything, and there are children who are born understanding the world. During the drive back to their apartment in the Lincoln Park neighborhood, Marina sat quietly in the back seat, looking out the window at the bustling streets of Chicago. Robert noticed Beatrice watching the girl in the rearview mirror, trying to decipher this strange child who had burst into their lives so unexpectedly. At home, Isabel was in the living room, sitting in her adapted chair, watching cartoons. On television with that usual vacant expression, but when she saw Marina enter, her little face lit up. "Marina, you came!" Marina ran to her and held her hands gently. "I promised I would, and I always keep my promises. Today we're going to start the work for real, okay? It will be tiring sometimes, but you're strong, I know you are." Beatrice watched everything with her arms crossed, her posture still defensive, but Robert noticed that something in her expression had changed. Perhaps it was Isabel's reaction, the genuine joy in his daughter's eyes, or perhaps it was Marina herself with that quiet seriousness that inspired an inexplicable trust. "Very well, Marina," Beatrice said, her voice professional. "Explain to me exactly what you intend to do." Marina turned to her respectfully. "I'm going to start with the senses. Smells, textures, sounds, tastes. I'm going to help Isabel's body remember. Because it's not that she can't walk, it's that her body has forgotten how to send the right message. It's as if the pathways are full of stones, and I'm going to help remove those stones one by one. I'll use some herbs for massage. I'll apply pressure to specific points on the body. I'll tell stories, sing. My grandma said that healing is a conversation between the healer and the person's body. And I'm here to have that conversation with Isabel's body." "What kind of herbs?" Beatrice asked, her medical instincts on high alert. "Rosemary, mint, arnica, calendula, a few others I know. Nothing that will do harm. Just things that help to relax, to stimulate circulation, to awaken the skin. I can show them to you if you like." Beatrice hesitated, then nodded. "Yes, I want to see everything you're going to use." And so began a journey that no one in that house could have imagined. In the following days, Marina became a constant presence in the miller's apartment. Robert would pick her up every morning from the shelter, and she would stay with Isabel until the late afternoon, when he would take her back. The sessions were long, intense, filled with moments of contemplative silence interspersed with soft conversations, songs Marina had learned from her grandmother, stories about plants and animals, about the sky and the earth. Marina brought from the shelter a worn-out notebook where she wrote down, in a childish but careful script, T, recipes, plant descriptions, small drawings. It was the notebook her grandmother had started and that she now continued, preserving that ancestral knowledge that threatened to be lost in time. Beatrice, initially skeptical, began to observe subtle but undeniable changes. Isabel's reflexes improved. Her sensitivity to touch increased. Small muscle spasms that were once random began to show a pattern, a response to Marina's stimuli. She documented everything meticulously, noting every reaction, every bit of progress, no matter how small. And the more she documented, the more she found herself confronted with something her scientific training couldn't explain. This girl, with no formal training, was doing something that 23 specialists had said was impossible. She was bringing Isabel back. 3 weeks had passed since that first meeting in the park, and the Miller house had a different energy. It was no longer that heavy, suffocating silence that had dominated the past few months, that atmosphere of a hospital and despair. Now there was life, movement, the sounds of children's laughter echoing through the hallways. Marina had become part of the family's daily routine, arriving every morning at 8 and staying until late afternoon, entirely dedicated to Isabel. The sessions followed a ritual that Marina had developed with a wisdom that seemed to come from somewhere far beyond her 9 years of age. It always began with scents. She brought small cloth bags with different herbs, lavender to calm, rosemary to stimulate, mint to awaken. She would rub the crushed leaves on Isabel's wrists, the nape of her neck, behind her ears. She said that smells were like doors to the body's memory, that they helped create new pathways when the old ones were blocked. Then came the touches. Marina worked methodically, always starting with Isabel's feet, those little feet that had forgotten how to move. She pressed specific points with impressive precision, gentle but firm circular movements, following invisible lines she said she could feel under the skin. She explained to Beatrice, who watched everything with scientific attention, that she was following the energy meridians, a concept the neurologist knew from traditional Chinese medicine but had never given much thought to. The most fascinating part, however, was the stories. Marina had an infinite repertoire of tales her grandmother had taught her. Stories about healing plants, about animals that taught life lessons, about rivers that carried away pain, and mountains that held secrets of healing. As she told them, her hands never stopped working, massaging, pressing, stimulating, and Isabel listened to every word with an attention that seemed hypnotic, her little eyes shining with an intensity that hadn't existed before. Beatrice documented everything in a thick notebook. She noted times, techniques used, observed reactions. As a scientist, she needed data, tangible evidence, and the evidence was appearing, slowly but consistently. In the first week, Isabel had regained full sensation in her feet. She could feel when Marina touched her toes, when she ran different textures across the soles of her feet. In the second week, small voluntary movements began to appear. Nothing dramatic yet, but undeniable. Her toes moved when asked. There was a muscle contraction in her ankles. Now, in the third week, Isabel could slightly bend her knees. They were small movements. They took visible effort. They left the girl exhausted, but they were there. Robert cried every time he saw it. He couldn't help it. 3 months of complete paralysis. 3 months of specialists saying it was impossible, and there was his daughter slowly, miraculously coming back. Marina never boasted about the results. On the contrary, she maintained a serene humility, always saying that it wasn't she who was healing, but Isabel's own body that was remembering, rediscovering its pathways. She was just a facilitator, she said, someone who talked to the body and helped it find its way back. The relationship between Marina and Isabel had deepened in a beautiful and touching way. They talked about everything. Marina told her about her life at the shelter, about the other children who lived there, about how much she missed her grandmother and the Kentucky countryside. Isabel, in turn, talked about school, about friends she hadn't seen since she got sick, about the cartoons she liked to watch, and the books her mother read to her before bed. It was an unlikely but profound friendship, born of mutual need. Isabel needed hope, someone who believed in her without pity or condescension. Marina needed purpose, to feel that the knowledge her grandmother had passed on to her was not in vain, that it had value and could make a difference. Together, they completed each other in a way that transcended logic. Beatrice, observing this connection, felt something transform within her. As a doctor, she still struggled to accept that she was witnessing something her training couldn't explain, but as a mother, she couldn't deny that Marina had brought her daughter back, not just physically, but emotionally. The apathetic, distant girl had disappeared. In her place was an engaged, hopeful Isabel, actively fighting for her recovery. It was on a Thursday afternoon that things started to get complicated. Beatrice was at the hospital in her office when Dr. Edward Morrison, head of the neurology department, and her direct superior walked in without knocking. He was a man in his 60s with impeccably combed grey hair and a perpetually authoritarian posture. One of the most respected neurologists in Chicago, author of several scientific papers, an international speaker. "Beatrice, we need to talk," he said, closing the door behind him with a seriousness that made her stomach clench. "Dr. Morrison, of course. Please, have a seat." He didn't sit. He stood with his arms crossed, wearing that expression of disapproval Beatrice knew well from meetings where protocols had not been followed. "Some concerning information about your daughter has come to my attention," he began, his voice controlled but clearly irritated. "Isabel, correct?" Beatrice felt the blood run cold in her veins. "Yes, my daughter. I've heard that you are allowing a child with no medical training whatsoever, a street kid, to treat your daughter with unproven methods. Is this true?" Beatrice took a deep breath. She had expected this moment would eventually come, but not so soon. "Who told you this?" "That's not important. What's important is that, as a doctor at this hospital, As a neurologist with an established reputation, you are validating pseudoscientific practices. Do you have any idea what this represents? The message it sends to patients and colleagues. Dr. Morrison, with all due respect, Beatrice said, trying to keep her voice steady. My daughter had been completely paralyzed for 3 months. 23 specialists, including yourself, stated that there was no effective treatment, and now, after 3 weeks with Marina, she is regaining movement. Voluntary, measurable, documented movements. Edward made a sound of disdain. Spontaneous recovery. It happens in rare cases of neural injury. You know this, Beatrice. It has nothing to do with a child's herbs and mystical touches. It's pure temporal coincidence. And what if it's not? Beatrice countered, feeling a courage she didn't know she had. What if there's something beyond what our current medicine can explain? What if we're limiting our possibilities by rejecting anything that doesn't fit perfectly into our protocols? Edward's face turned red. This is extremely disappointing coming from you. I expected you to have more critical sense, more commitment to science. But let me be clear, if you continue with this unconventional treatment, especially involving an unaccompanied minor, I will take this case to the medical board. It could represent an ethical violation, and your position at this hospital could be at risk. Do you understand me? Beatrice felt the world spin. Her career, 15 years of dedication, all threatened. But when she thought of Isabel, of the progress she was seeing, of the joy returning to her daughter's eyes, she knew what she had to say. I understand perfectly, Dr. Morrison, and I'm sorry you see it that way. But I am not stopping my daughter's treatment. She is getting better, and that's all that matters to me as a mother. If that means trouble for my career, then so be it. Edward stared at her for a long moment, clearly surprised by the firmness in her voice. Then he shook his head in disapproval. You will regret this choice, Beatrice. You will regret it when you realize you've compromised your credibility over a case of spontaneous recovery that would have been attributed to nothing more than the natural course of the disease. He left, slamming the door, leaving Beatrice alone in her office, trembling. She picked up the phone and called Robert, told him everything. He listened in silence, and then said with a voice full of determination, "If he takes it to the medical board, if he threatens your career, we'll pull Isabel out of the hospital's care, we'll treat her at home, we'll hire physical therapists, set up our own facility. We won't let anyone interrupt our daughter's recovery." That night, Robert and Beatrice talked for hours. They discussed possibilities, risks, consequences, and they made a decision that would change everything. The next morning, when Marina arrived for the daily session, she found them waiting in the living room with serious expressions. "Marina, we need to talk to you," Robert said, gesturing to the sofa. "Please, sit down." The girl obeyed, her large eyes showing concern. "Did I do something wrong?" "No, not at all," Beatrice hurried to say. "On the contrary, you've done something incredible for Isabel. But complications have arisen. At the hospital where I work, my boss found out about the treatment and is threatening to take the case to the medical board. He thinks I'm being irresponsible." Marina looked down, and Robert saw sadness cross her face. "I understand. People were always afraid of what my grandma did too. They called it witchcraft, quackery. I can stop coming if it's going to cause problems for you." "No," Isabel said suddenly, her voice high-pitched but firm. She was sitting in her adapted chair in the room, having heard everything. "I don't want Marina to stop. She's helping me. I'm getting better. Please, Mommy, Daddy, don't send her away." Robert knelt beside his daughter, holding her little hands. "No one is sending Marina away, my love. We were thinking of something different, something bigger." "Bigger how?" Marina asked cautiously. Beatrice leaned forward. "Marina, we want to remove Isabel from the hospital's supervision and set up a rehabilitation center here at home. We're going to hire physical therapists, occupational therapists, speech therapists if necessary. We'll have all the proper equipment installed, and we want you to be an integral part of the team, not just visiting for a few hours a day, but living here with us, as part of the family." The silence that followed was profound. Marina looked at the three of them, her eyes filling with tears. "You want me to live here? With you?" If you want to, Robert said gently. We'll talk to Sister Lucy, do everything properly, legally. You would have your own room, you'd continue your schooling, have your life. But you would also be part of Isabel's recovery, using your gifts, your knowledge. What do you think? Marina didn't answer with words. She simply stood up and hugged Beatrice with a force that surprised her. She cried in that embrace, sobs from a girl who had lost so much, who lived in a shelter without truly belonging to anyone, who carried precious knowledge but was viewed with suspicion by most people. And here, in this house, in this family, she was not just being accepted but valued. She was being called part of the family. Isabel, from her chair, was also crying and holding out her little arms. Marina ran to her, and the two girls hugged. These two girls so different yet so connected by mutual need and affection. The next few days were a flurry of activity. Robert and Beatrice spoke with Sister Lucy, explaining the situation. The nun, though sad to lose Marina, recognized that this was better for the girl. They handled all the necessary paperwork, establishing a temporary guardianship that would allow Marina to live with the family legally. They hired 2 excellent physical therapists, an occupational therapist, bought rehabilitation equipment, and transformed one of the guest rooms into a complete therapy room. Marina was given the room next to Isabel's. It was small but cozy, with a new bed, a wardrobe that Beatrice filled, with clothes and a desk where she could study. When she saw it all for the first time, Marina stood at the door, unable to believe it. It was the first room she'd had all to herself since she left her grandmother's house. The first night Marina slept there, Isabel asked her to come keep her company before she fell asleep. The two lay talking in the dark, whispering like children at a sleepover, and it was then that Isabel said something that deeply moved Marina. "You know you're my sister now, right? Not by blood, but by soul. My Mom and Dad love you. And I love you too. You brought me back, Marina, not just my legs, but everything. You brought me back." Marina cried silently in the dark, holding Isabel's hand. "I love you too, Belle. And I promise I'll keep helping you until you can run, jump, dance, until you can do everything you used to." "Do you think I will?" Isabel asked with that vulnerability that sometimes still appeared. "I know you will," Marina answered with conviction. "Because your body is fighting, I feel it every day, and when the body fights together with the heart, nothing can stop it." With Marina living in the house and the rehabilitation team in place, Isabel's progress accelerated remarkably. The physical therapists, initially skeptical of Marina's presence, quickly recognized that there was something special about the girl's work. She had an intuition about Isabel's body that went beyond their technical knowledge. She could identify points of tension, blockages, even before they appeared on scans. And when she combined her ancestral techniques with modern physical therapy exercises, the results were impressive. Julia, one of the physical therapists, a 40-year-old woman with 20 years of experience in the field, confided in Beatrice after 2 weeks. "I don't know how to explain it, but this girl has a true gift. She feels things that our equipment takes time to detect. I have to admit, I was skeptical at first, but now I'm learning from her. I'm taking notes on her techniques, trying to understand the logic behind them. It's as if she has access to very old knowledge that modern medicine has forgotten." Beatrice listened to this and felt her scientific world expand in ways she never imagined possible. She began to research traditional medicine, ancient healing practices from around the world. She discovered serious studies on acupressure, on the mind-body connection, on how therapeutic touch could influence neurological processes. They weren't definitive studies. Science was still in its infancy in these areas, but there was something there. Something real, measurable, even if not yet fully understood. Meanwhile, at the hospital, Beatrice's situation was getting more complicated. Dr. Edward Morrison had taken the case to the medical board as threatened. He claimed that Beatrice was putting her daughter at risk by allowing unconventional treatments, that she was setting a bad example as a doctor, that she could influence other parents. To seek dangerous alternatives, Beatrice had to appear at a board hearing. She brought all her documentation, charts showing Isabel's progress, reports from the physical therapists attesting to the improvement. She defended herself with a passion that surprised everyone, arguing that as a doctor, She had a duty to explore all therapeutic possibilities, especially when conventional methods had failed. The board decided that, while they disapproved of the unconventional methods, there was no evidence of negligence or misconduct, since the child was under constant professional supervision and was showing documented improvement. Beatrice was acquitted of any formal charges, but received a warning. Dr. Morrison, dissatisfied with the outcome, made her life at the hospital difficult. Sarcastic comments, exclusion from important meetings, constant looks of disapproval. It was on a particularly difficult evening, after an especially tough day at the hospital, that Beatrice came home and found a scene that made her stop at the door of the therapy room. Isabel was standing. Not steadily, she needed the support of the parallel bars installed in the room. Her little legs trembled with the effort, but she was standing. And she was taking steps. 1, 2, 3, wobbly but deliberate steps. Marina was beside her, lightly holding one of her hands, not for support but to give confidence. Julia, the physical therapist, was on the other side, ready to assist if needed. And Robert was filming everything with his phone, tears streaming freely down his face. This was 5 weeks after the first meeting in the park. 5 weeks since Isabel had been completely paralyzed. And there she was, taking steps. Doctors had said it was impossible. Edward Morrison had called it a coincidence, but there was nothing coincidental about it. It was hard work, dedication, love, traditional knowledge united with modern science. It was a miracle built brick by brick, step by step, touch by touch. Beatrice felt her knees weaken and leaned against the doorframe. Marina saw her and smiled, that serene, wise smile that didn't belong on a 9-year-old child. "Look, Mommy," Isabel said, her voice full of pride and joy. "I'm walking. I'm really walking." Beatrice entered the room, knelt on the floor, and Isabel, with enormous effort and determination, took 3 more steps to reach her. When she fell into her mother's arms, they both collapsed into sobs, embracing, silently grateful for this moment that had seemed impossible just a short time ago. Marina watched the scene with tears in her eyes, but also with a deep satisfaction. She could feel her grandmother's presence there, as if the wise woman who had taught her everything was somehow present, witnessing, approving. "You did well, Grandma," Marina murmured softly. "I taught her like you taught me, and it worked. It's working." That night, after Isabel had fallen asleep, exhausted but happy, Robert and Beatrice sat on the balcony of their apartment, looking at the lights of Chicago spread out like terrestrial stars. They talked about the future, about possibilities, and it was there that an idea was born that would change not only their lives, but the lives of hundreds of other families. "What if we didn't keep this just for ourselves?" Robert said thoughtfully. "What if we created a place where other children could have what Isabel had? A center that combines traditional medicine with ancestral knowledge, that doesn't reject either one, but combines the best of both worlds." Beatrice looked at her husband, and in his eyes she saw the same determination she felt growing within herself. "An integrative center," she said slowly, testing the words. "With doctors, physical therapists, but also with practitioners of traditional wisdom. A place where Marina could teach what she knows, where her knowledge would be valued and studied, not dismissed as superstition." "Exactly," Robert agreed, growing excited. "We could help other families who are desperate like we were, children with neurological motor conditions that traditional medicine has given up on. Give them the same chance we gave Isabel." The two were silent for a moment, the weight and magnitude of that idea settling in. It would be a huge challenge. It would require resources, planning, and confronting the prejudices of the medical community. But it would also be revolutionary. It would be a bridge between two worlds that rarely communicated. "Let's do it," Beatrice said finally, her voice firm. "Let's create this center, and let's prove that tradition and science don't have to be enemies. They can be allies in the fight for healing." Robert took his wife's hand and squeezed it tightly. "Starting tomorrow, we begin planning. We're going to make this happen. For Isabel, for Marina, and for all the children who need it. And so, on that starry night in Chicago, the dream that would become a reality was born. A dream of healing, of integration, of respect for knowledge in all its forms. A dream that two girls, one paralyzed and the other a healer, had unknowingly planted, and which would now grow to become something much bigger than any of them could imagine. 6 months after that night on the balcony, the dream began to take concrete shape. Robert had found a perfect property in Wicker Park, an old 3-story house that had once been a private school. It had large rooms, a spacious garden in the back, good ventilation and natural light. The ideal place to transform into an integrative rehabilitation center. With their savings, a bank loan and the sale of an investment apartment they owned, they managed to purchase it and begin renovations. Beatrice, meanwhile, had made a decision that surprised everyone, including herself. She resigned from Northwestern Memorial Hospital. It wasn't an easy choice. It was 15 years of a career built with dedication and sacrifice. But after the episode with Dr. Edward Morrison, after seeing how the traditional medical community reacted with hostility to what they considered pseudoscience, she realized she couldn't continue working in that environment. Her vision of medicine had expanded, transformed. She could no longer pretend she didn't believe what she was seeing with her own eyes. The news of her departure caused a stir at the hospital. Some colleagues approached her, trying to dissuade her, saying she was throwing away a brilliant career. Others, few but significant, confessed in private that they admired her courage, that they also had doubts about the rigidity of conventional medicine, but lacked the bravery to question the system. One of these people was Dr. Christine Adams, a 45-year-old endocrinologist who had worked with Beatrice on a few cases. She approached Beatrice on her last day at the hospital, took her for coffee and made an unexpected proposal. "Beatrice, I followed your daughter's case from a distance," Christine said, stirring sugar into her coffee. "And I confess, I was fascinated, not just by the recovery, which is remarkable, but by your courage in following a different path. I heard you're opening an integrative center. Is it true?" "Yes," Beatrice confirmed. "We're in the final stages of renovation. The idea is to unite traditional medicine with alternative practices that are proven effective. Acupuncture, phytotherapy, bodywork based on ancestral knowledge. All documented, studied, done, with seriousness." Christine nodded thoughtfully. "I'd like to be a part of that. I know it sounds crazy, I have a stable career here, but I'm tired, Beatrice. Tired of treating patients only with medication, of ignoring the nutritional, emotional, and energetic aspects of health. I'd like to work in a more holistic, more human way. Would you have room for an endocrinologist willing to learn new things?" Beatrice felt a wave of emotion. This was an important validation. Christine was respected, competent, recognized. Having her on the team would give the center credibility. "Of course, we have room. We need doctors from various specialties, people willing to work in an integrated way. You would be very welcome." And so the team began to form. Besides Beatrice and Christine, they managed to recruit a pediatric orthopedist named Dr. Fernando Rivera, who had been studying Chinese medicine in his spare time for years. 2 excellent physical therapists, Julia, who was already working with Isabel, and Patricia, who specialized in aquatic therapy. An occupational therapist, 3 nurses, a nutritionist who was also an expert in medicinal plants, and 2 psychologists with training in integrative approaches. But the heart of the center, everyone knew, was Marina. Now 10 years old, the girl had grown not just in age but in wisdom and confidence. She still had that serenity that characterized her, but now she spoke with more firmness about her knowledge. Beatrice had enrolled her in a good private school, where Marina excelled, especially in natural sciences and biology. The girl devoured books on anatomy, physiology, botany. She wanted to understand scientifically what she did intuitively. At night, after school and her work at the center, Marina studied her grandmother's notebook. Those yellowed pages with handwritten recipes, drawings of plants, notes on energy, points in the body. She began to copy everything neatly into a new, more organized notebook, adding her own observations, her learnings. She was creating a bridge between her grandmother's ancestral knowledge and the scientific knowledge she absorbed from books and conversations with the doctors. Isabel, for her part, was unrecognizable from the paralyzed girl of months ago. She now walked on her own, without support, though still with some difficulty on uneven terrain. She had returned to school, reconnected with her friends, and resumed a life that had seemed lost forever. But the experience had transformed her. She was no longer simply a cheerful, carefree child. There was a new depth to her, a special empathy for people in difficulty. She spent hours in the part of the center where they were already receiving the first children for treatment, talking to them, playing, offering the comfort of someone who had been through the same thing. The official inauguration of the Renaissance Integrative Medicine Center took place on a sunny September morning. The name had been Marina's idea, and everyone agreed it was perfect. Renaissance. That was exactly what they did there. Give people a chance to be reborn, to start over, to recover what seemed lost. They didn't have a big party, just a simple ceremony with the team, some families already in treatment, and a small blessing that Sister Lucy, from the shelter where Marina had lived, insisted on giving. The nun was proud, seeing the girl she had sheltered now flourishing in such a beautiful and meaningful way. Dr. Edward Morrison, of course, did not attend, but his absence was not felt. There were other people there, people who believed, who supported, who shared the vision that healing could come in many forms. The first few months were challenging. Creating protocols that united conventional medicine with alternative practices required creativity and a lot of dialogue. There were heated debates among the team about where to draw lines, what to include, what to leave out, but always with respect, always seeking evidence, testing, documenting. Marina worked mainly with children who had neuromuscular conditions. Each case was unique, requiring a different approach. She always attended to them, accompanied by a physical therapist or doctor, and everything she did was recorded in detailed medical records. Beatrice insisted on this. She wanted Marina's work to be taken seriously, so it couldn't be dismissed as mere folklore. And the results began to appear. They weren't instant miracles, they weren't magical cures, but there was consistent progress, children improving beyond conventional medical expectations. A boy with cerebral palsy who couldn't move his arms began to have fine motor control after 3 months of integrative treatment. A girl with muscular dystrophy managed to significantly prolong her ability to walk independently. A teenager with after effects of meningitis recovered some of the movements that doctors had said were impossible to restore. Each case was carefully documented. Beatrice and Christine published reports, attended medical conferences to present the results. They faced skepticism, criticism, sometimes open hostility. But the data was there, undeniable. Something was working. It was at one of these medical conferences in Chicago that Beatrice met Dr. Michael Foster, a neurologist from Washington, D.C., who worked with neurological rehabilitation using innovative techniques. He approached her after her presentation, interested and respectful. "Dr. Miller, your research is fascinating, especially the results with the young healer. You mentioned she works with sensory stimuli and specific pressure points. It reminds me a lot of induced neuroplasticity, the brain's ability to create new neural pathways when properly stimulated. It's possible that what she's doing intuitively is exactly that, stimulating neuroplasticity in ways we don't yet fully understand." Beatrice felt a deep validation in those words. It was exactly what she had been thinking, but hearing it from another respected neurologist gave weight to the theory. Michael even proposed a partnership to study Marina's methods more deeply, to map exactly what she did and try to understand the neurological mechanisms behind it. In the following months, Marina became the subject of scientific study, but in a respectful and collaborative way. Michael and his team came to the center regularly, observed her work, performed tests on the children before and after sessions, measured brain activity, nerve conduction, muscle tone. Marina, far from feeling invaded, was fascinated. She asked questions about the equipment, about what the tests showed, absorbing knowledge like a sponge. It was during one of these studies that they discovered something remarkable. Marina had exceptional tactile sensitivity. She could detect changes in temperature and muscle tension so subtle that most people wouldn't notice. Her ability to read non-verbal body language was also extraordinary. She picked up on micro-expressions, changes in breathing patterns, small muscle tremors that indicated discomfort or relaxation. It was as if her senses were calibrated differently, more acutely. "This isn't mystical," Dr. Foster explained to the team in a meeting. "It's neurodiversity. Some people are born with heightened sensory sensitivities. Marina likely has this trait, and her grandmother, recognizing it, trained her from a young age to use these abilities constructively. What seems like a supernatural gift is actually a combination of neurological predisposition and intensive training from childhood." Marina listened to all of this with interest, but she didn't seem perturbed by having her gift explained scientifically. On the contrary, she seemed relieved. "My grandma always said that what I did was natural, not magic. She was right. It's just a different way of perceiving the world." While the center grew, Marina and Isabel's lives also followed their course. The two were inseparable, true sisters in everything but blood. Isabel, now 5.5, had returned to being the vibrant and cheerful child she once was, but with a greater awareness of fragility and resilience. Marina, approaching 11, maintained that old maturity, but was also beginning to show a more childlike, lighter side. She played, laughed, made friends at school, but there were moments when the longing for her grandmother still squeezed Marina's heart tightly. Usually at night, when everyone else was asleep, she would look out her bedroom window, remembering her time in Kentucky, her grandmother's simple house, the smell of herbs drying in the sun, the walks through the woods learning about plants. It was on one of those nights, when Marina was feeling particularly melancholic, that there was a soft knock on her bedroom door. It was Beatrice, wearing a nightgown, her hair down, her expression gentle. "May I come in?" Marina nodded, quickly wiping her eyes. Beatrice sat on the edge of the bed and was silent for a moment, just keeping her company. "You're missing your grandmother," Beatrice said softly, not as a question but as a statement. Marina nodded, biting her lower lip to keep from crying. "Every day. I miss her every day. Her voice, the way she taught me things, how she made everything seem simple and clear." Beatrice took the girl's hand and held it tenderly. "She would be so proud of you, Marina, of what you've become, of what you're doing. You are honoring the knowledge she passed on to you, but you're also going beyond it. You're learning, growing, transforming that knowledge into something even greater." "You think so?" Marina asked in a small voice. "I'm sure of it. And you know, sometimes I think that maybe your grandmother knew that you had something special, that you could make a difference in the lives of many people. And that's why she prepared you so well. She gave you the tools, and you're using those tools to build something beautiful." Marina finally let the tears fall, and Beatrice pulled her into a motherly embrace. The girl cried there, releasing a pain she had held in for months, and Beatrice just held her tight, offering the silent comfort that only a mother knows how to give. Because that's what Beatrice had become to Marina, even without any official papers, even without blood ties. She was her mother in the way that mattered, from the heart. When Marina calmed down, Beatrice had an idea. "What if we organized a special day at the center, a day dedicated to the memory of your grandmother, celebrating traditional knowledge, the folk healers, the herbalists? We could invite other people who work with traditional medicine, have an exchange of knowledge, teach the children about medicinal plants. It would be a way to honor Joanna and everything she represented." Marina lifted her face, her eyes still wet, but now shining with hope. "You would do that?" "Of course we would. Your grandmother deserves to be remembered. Her knowledge deserves to be celebrated. And more than that, it deserves to be passed on. That's what we do at the center, isn't it? We unite tradition and modernity, honor the past while building the future." And so was born the Day of Ancestral Wisdom, an event that would take place annually. At the center, bringing together practitioners of traditional medicine from different regions of the country, folk healers from the Appalachians, Native American medicine men, root workers, masters of holistic bodywork, all were invited to share their knowledge, not as a folkloric curiosity, but as legitimate science, valid knowledge. The first event took place 3 months later, and it was a surprising success. More than 200 people attended, including curious health professionals, patients' families, university students, and journalists. There were lectures, practical workshops, demonstrations. Marina led a workshop on identifying medicinal plants and was moved to see people's genuine interest. But the most touching moment was when an elderly woman with completely white hair approached Marina at the end of the day. She had come from the hills of Kentucky, from the region of Willow Creek, and in her hands she carried a package wrapped in cloth. "You're Joanna's granddaughter, aren't you?" the woman asked with a trembling voice. Marina's heart raced. "Yes, ma'am. Did you know my grandmother?" "Knew her well. I'm Hazel, a distant cousin of your grandmother. I heard you were here in Chicago doing beautiful work, and I came all this way to bring you something." She held out the package. "This was Joanna's. She left it with me, asked me to give it to you when you were ready. I think now is the right time." With trembling hands, Marina unwrapped the cloth. Inside was an old notebook with a worn, brown hardcover. When she opened it, she immediately recognized her grandmother's handwriting. It was another notebook of recipes, of knowledge, but this one was different, more complete, more detailed. It had careful illustrations of plants, descriptions of how to grow them, when to harvest, how to prepare them. It had notes on different health conditions and their treatments. It was an encyclopedia of traditional knowledge compiled over decades, and on the first page, a letter, written in that shaky but firm script of her grandmother. "My dearest Marina, if you are reading this, it means I have left this world and you have grown enough to receive this treasure. This notebook represents 70 years of learning, mine and that of the women who came before me. It is knowledge that cannot die, but it also cannot stand still in time. You, my dear granddaughter, have the gift and the intelligence to carry this forward. Study, learn, mix the old with the new. Do not be afraid to question, to test, to improve what is here. The knowledge that is worthwhile is the knowledge that grows. Be the bridge, Marina. Be the bridge between what was and what will be. With all my love, your Grandma Joanna." Marina couldn't read any further. She broke down in tears right there, clutching the notebook, feeling as if her grandmother were present, as if she had waited all this time to give her this gift. Beatrice, Robert, Isabel, all gathered around her, offering support, sharing that sacred moment. Hazel stayed in Chicago for a few more days, staying at the Miller's house. She spent hours talking with Marina, telling stories about her grandmother, about the lineage of healers in their family that went back for generations. Marina recorded everything, not wanting to lose a single detail, a single story. "Your grandmother was special," Hazel said in one of these conversations. "She had a connection with the plants, with the earth, with people. But you know what impressed me most about her? It was her humility. She never thought she had all the answers, was always willing to learn, even from younger people. She used to say that a healer who stops learning ceases to be a healer and becomes a charlatan." Marina absorbed every word, every lesson. And at night, she studied her grandmother's notebook, comparing it with what she learned in medical textbooks, making fascinating connections. She discovered that many of the herbs her grandmother used had scientifically proven anti-inflammatory properties, that the pressure points she worked on corresponded to important nerve endings, that the stories and songs that accompanied the treatments likely had a neurological effect, calming the nervous system, inducing states of relaxation conducive to healing. It was exactly what her grandmother had asked for in the letter. Marina was being the bridge. She was taking ancestral knowledge, validating it with modern science, creating something new that was greater than the sum of its parts. The center, meanwhile, continued to grow. From 15 initial employees, they now had 35. From 5 patients a week, they grew to over 40. Children came from all over Chicago, some even from other states, seeking that integrative approach that combined the best of modern medicine with ancestral wisdom. And Marina, at the center of it all, remained that serene, wise girl, now more confident but still profoundly humble. She treated each child with the same dedication, the same empathy, the same certainty that every body has the capacity to heal. It just needs to find the right path. Isabel, watching her sister of the heart at work, felt a desire grow within her. She wanted to help too. She wanted to be a part of it. And one night, during family dinner, she announced her decision with the seriousness that only a 6-year-old can muster. "When I grow up, I'm going to be a doctor, just like Mom, but I'm going to work with sick children, and I'm going to use everything Marina taught me too. I'm going to be an integrative doctor." Beatrice and Robert exchanged emotional glances. Their daughter, whom they had almost lost to paralysis, now dreamed of healing others. And Marina, sitting next to Isabel, took her hand and squeezed it affectionately. "You'll be an amazing doctor, and I'll always be here, helping you, teaching you everything I know. We'll work together, make a difference in a lot of people's lives." The two girls looked at each other and smiled, and in that moment, everyone at the table felt they were witnessing something special, the beginning of a partnership that would last a lifetime, that would transform countless lives, that would prove that love, knowledge, and determination can achieve what seems impossible. 15 years had passed since that afternoon in Lincoln Park. The Renaissance Integrative Medicine Center now occupied a complex of 3 modern buildings in River North, with therapeutic gardens and rooms equipped with a blend of advanced medical technology and spaces for ancestral healing practices. Marina Stone Miller was 25 years old. The surname Miller was officially added when Robert and Beatrice finalized her adoption. She had graduated with a degree in physical therapy from the University of Chicago and completed a master's in neuroscience. Her thesis, Bridges Between Ancestral Medicine and Modern Neuroscience, made an impact in the academic community by documenting and scientifically explaining practices that had existed for centuries but were ignored by conventional medicine. Grandma Joanna's notebook was transformed into a book published by the University of Chicago Press. Wisdom of the Healing Hands became a reference used in integrative medicine courses across the country. Marina traveled giving lectures, had trained over 200 health professionals, but maintained the humility her grandmother valued. She always said she was just translating into scientific language what wise women had been doing for generations. Isabel had fulfilled her promise from when she was 6. She graduated from medical school, specialized in physiatry, and now, at 21, worked alongside Marina. The two were a perfect team. Isabel with her rigorous medical approach, Marina with her keen intuition and knowledge of medicinal plants. Together, they developed protocols that combined the best of both worlds. The center had grown exponentially. 200 employees, more than 3,000 children treated. Doctors, physical therapists, nurses, but also folk. Healers, herbalists, masters of different traditions, all working in harmony. There was international recognition, conferences in Germany, the United States, Japan. The American model was influencing practices around the world. Even Dr. Edward Morrison had changed. He formally apologized to Beatrice and spent months at the center learning about integrative methods, transforming his own medical practice. One Saturday afternoon, Marina and Isabel returned to Lincoln Park, the place where it had all begun 15 years ago. They walked to the small pond where Robert had stopped the wheelchair on that distant afternoon. They sat on the grass, in silence. "Do you remember what you were thinking that day?" Marina asked. Isabel smiled sadly. "That I would never walk again, that my life was over. I was 4 years old and ready to give up." "I was desperate too," Marina confessed. "I thought my grandmother's knowledge was worthless in the big city. Then I saw you and something told me I had to help." Isabel squeezed her sister's hand. "You saved my life and changed the lives of thousands of children." Marina shook her head humbly. "It was us. You, me, your parents, the whole team, and the generations of healers who kept this knowledge alive." Then they saw a family nearby. A father was pushing a wheelchair with a little girl of about 5, looking vacant, disconnected from the world. The father had that same look of despair that Robert knew so well. Marina and Isabel looked at each other and walked over to the family. "Good afternoon," Isabel said gently. "Sorry to bother you. I'm a doctor, and this is Marina, a physical therapist. We work at a children's rehabilitation center." The man blinked, surprised. "Does your daughter have neurological problems?" He nodded, his eyes welling up. "Transverse myelitis. 2 months ago. The doctors say there's nothing to be done, that she won't walk again." Marina knelt beside the chair. "What's your name, sweetie?" "Laura," the girl answered quietly. "Laura, I knew a girl who couldn't walk either. Do you know what happened? She got better, and today she's an amazing doctor." "That was me," Isabel confirmed. "I was where you are, and Marina helped me. Now we help other children every day." The father looked on in disbelief. "Is there really a chance?" "There's always a chance," Marina said with conviction. "I can't promise a complete cure, but I promise we'll do everything in our power. We have a dedicated team, years of experience, and we always have hope." Isabel handed him a card. "Call on Monday, schedule an evaluation, come and see our center." The man took the card with trembling hands. "I will, Monday, thank you for caring." As the family walked away, Marina and Isabel returned to their spot. The circle was complete. 15 years ago, a young healer had offered help in this park. Today, the two of them together offered hope to another family in despair. "This will never stop, will it?" Isabel said. "There will always be another child who needs help." "And we'll always be here," Marina completed. "This is what we exist for. When we receive the gift of healing, we have an obligation to share it, not keep it to ourselves." They stayed until the sun began to set. They talked about the future, new projects. Marina dreamed of her own University of Integrative Medicine. Isabel wanted to expand to other cities. They were big dreams, but not impossible. After all, 15 years ago the center had also seemed impossible. When they stood up, Marina looked at the pond. "One last time. Thank you, Grandma, for teaching me, for believing in me. I hope you're proud." In that gentle breeze, Marina felt a presence, not in a supernatural way, but in that profound way the dead remain through their teachings, through the love they left behind. Grandma Joanna was there in every therapeutic touch, in every child who learned about plants, in every professional who valued ancestral knowledge. They passed by the center on their way back. In the main hallway, an entire wall was covered with photos, children who had passed through over the years, children in wheelchairs, who now walked, children who couldn't move their arms and now drew. In the center of the wall, 2 photos. The first, old, taken by Robert on that first day, a barefoot Marina kneeling beside Isabel's wheelchair. The second, recent, from the last graduation of physical therapists trained in the Renaissance method. Marina and Isabel in white coats, surrounded by 50 professionals ready to carry that knowledge forward. Between the photos, a bronze plaque. "Where there is love, knowledge and courage, healing finds its way. In memory of Joanna Stone, healer, teacher, keeper of ancestral wisdom." Marina touched the plaque, gently as she always did. And then they moved on, because there was always more work to do, more children to help, more hope to sow. That night, dinner was lively. Robert, now with grey hair, told stories from his work. Beatrice, with a master's in integrative medicine, discussed new protocols. Marina and Isabel talked about Laura and her family. Christine, Fernando and Julia were there too. Not just a family of blood, but one of choice, united by a common purpose. Later, Marina opened her notebook. She wrote about the day, about the continuing circle. On the last line, "True knowledge belongs to no one. It belongs to everyone. And it only has value when it is shared, when it transforms lives, when it builds bridges between who we were and who we can become." She looked out the window. Chicago glittered outside, millions of lives with their struggles and hopes. Somewhere little Laura was sleeping, not yet knowing that on Monday her life would begin to change. Marina thought of all the children yet to come. Each one would be received with the same care, the same hope she had offered Isabel 15 years ago. Because in the end, it was about love. Love that heals, that transforms, that doesn't give up. Love that refuses to accept the impossible. Love that builds bridges between tradition and science, between past and future, between despair and hope. Before sleeping, Marina whispered a prayer of gratitude for the grandmother who prepared her, for the family that welcomed her, for her sister of the soul, for all the children who trusted her, and for those yet to come. And so ends the story of Marina and Isabel. But it never really ends, because every day somewhere a child takes their first step after months of paralysis. A father cries with joy, a mother regains hope, all because a barefoot girl refused to let her knowledge die, because a family opened their hearts, because love, science, and tradition found a common path. The invisible girl became a symbol of a movement, the paralyzed child became a healer, and together they proved that where there is faith, affection, and courage, healing always finds its way back home. End of story. Dear listeners, we hope the story of Marina and Isabel has deeply touched your heart. If you were moved by this journey of overcoming, love and hope, please leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and tell us in the comments which moment marked you the most. Every day, we bring intense stories like this one, narratives that reveal the deepest side of the human soul, that show how love and determination can turn the impossible into reality. Don't miss our next episodes. We'll be waiting for you here, always with a new story to warm your heart and renew your faith in human kindness. Until the next story, and may you also find your bridge between what is and what can be.